Have you ever felt like life took everything from you, only to teach you how to start over from the most unexpected place? This story is about loss, new beginnings, and a love that changes everything. It's about finding strength where we least expect it and discovering that sometimes, what truly matters isn't what we've lost, but who we find along the way. If you enjoy stories like this, give it a like to help the channel grow and bring more heartwarming content like this one. Let's dive in. Imagine a man who once had it all: love, wealth, and power. Edouard was that man. He lived in an imposing mansion, surrounded by luxurious cars and a fortune that seemed unshakable. But his greatest treasure, the one thing that truly lit up his life, was Alessia, his wife. Alessia wasn't just beautiful, she had a sweet soul and a smile capable of healing the world's deepest wounds. When Edouard saw her for the first time, it was as if the world stood still. She saw in him what no one else could, the man hidden behind the suit and flawless demeanor. Together, they lived a pure, complete love. Then, on a rainy night, everything changed. A brutal accident tore Alessia from Edouard's arms, leaving a hole in his heart that he believed could never be filled. From that day forward, Edouard became a cold man, a survivor of his own pain. He traded the warmth of love for the weight of work, amassing wealth as if it could mend his loss. Yet, despite all his riches, the truth was that Edouard lived in an empty world, where the sound of laughter had vanished. Then came the final blow, more devastating than anything Edouard could have imagined. Betrayal struck from the last place he expected, someone he trusted blindly. One wrong move, and he lost everything: the fortune he had spent years building, his luxurious properties, and perhaps most painfully, the sense of control that had always defined his life. The man who once commanded important meetings from his penthouse in a glass tower now found himself searching for a modest place, any roof he could call home. Edouard had never allowed himself to imagine facing something like this. Until then, the idea of living without the comforts of a mansion or the pristine elegance of designer suits had been as distant as a childhood dream. But now, with the doors of his old life slammed shut, he was forced to face the stark reality. His lawyers tried to delay the inevitable, but there was no escape. The accounts were empty, the assets seized, and the friends vanished as quickly as his fortune. His next stop? A noisy, bustling neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. It was the absolute opposite of the world he once knew. The area was chaotic, vibrant, and so far removed from his former bubble of sophistication that it felt almost unreal. Edouard, who once chose the finest penthouse views, now found himself looking out at narrow streets, barefoot children running around, and neighbors shouting greetings from window to window. He never imagined that he, Edouard, the man once hailed as a visionary, would have to adjust to this new reality. At first, everything felt like a nightmare. Every sound, every detail of that new neighborhood seemed like an insult. It was as if the universe were mocking him, rubbing his downfall in his face. But as he drove through the outskirts, searching for the room he would rent, Edouard felt something he had never experienced before: the fragility of life. He was no longer the man who controlled everything, and now he was about to learn that sometimes, you have to lose it all to discover the true meaning of starting over. It was there that Edouard met Tessa. Ah, Tessa. She was a whirlwind of joy and generosity. Born and raised in that neighborhood, Tessa knew every corner, every person, and dedicated her life to helping the youth of the community. She taught hip-hop classes, using dance as a way to get kids off the streets and show them there were other possibilities in life. Despite her kindness and contagious energy, Tessa lived with very little. To continue her work, she decided to rent out the house in front and moved into a small annex in the backyard. When Edouard showed up to rent the space, Tessa knew immediately that he was different. Impeccably dressed, exuding an aura of arrogance, and with a cold gaze that seemed to judge everything around him, Edouard was the embodiment of everything Tessa despised. But she needed the money, and even though her instincts screamed that he would bring trouble, she agreed to rent it to him. From the beginning, the two clashed. Edouard complained about the noise, the kids playing, the loud music. Tessa, in turn, responded with firmness and humor. If it bothers you so much, maybe the problem isn't the place but you. This is the outskirts, and we live life intensely. Edouard was furious. He couldn't understand how Tessa could be so happy in a place he saw as a torment. But something about her intrigued him. It was her genuine joy, her way of embracing life even amidst so many difficulties. Slowly, Edouard began to notice something else: the pain hidden behind Tessa's smile. It was on a sunny afternoon, during a community event, that Edouard and Tessa began to truly connect. Tessa was organizing a big dance rehearsal at the local court, preparing the kids for an important performance. The sound of hip-hop echoed, laughter and chatter filled the air, and the positive energy was palpable. Edouard, observing everything from a distance, couldn't help but feel curious. He saw how the kids admired her, how her smile seemed to light up the entire environment. In the middle of the rehearsal, Tessa noticed Edouard standing near the entrance. With a spark of mischief in her eyes, she walked over to him. "Are you just going to stand there watching, or do you want to help?" she asked, crossing her arms and flashing that cheeky smile that was already starting to disarm him. Edouard hesitated. "I don't know anything about this," he replied, gesturing toward the kids dancing. Tessa smiled even wider. "Perfect, then it's a great time to learn. And who knows, you might discover you're useful for something beyond wearing expensive suits." Her teasing was light, but enough to spark in him the desire to participate, if only to prove her wrong. With some reluctance, Edouard agreed. He started by helping with simple tasks, like setting up chairs and organizing snacks. As he worked, he couldn't help but notice how the kids looked at Tessa, how she knew each name, each story, and how every word of encouragement from her seemed to lift everyone's spirits. Later, when the rehearsal ended, Tessa sat next to Edouard on the bench by the court. Both were tired, but her smile was as radiant as it had been at the start of the day. "You did well, Edouard. Who would have thought the man from the glass towers could handle chairs and snacks?" He chuckled softly, something rare for him, but which seemed to come naturally around her. "It wasn't as terrible as I imagined," he admitted, looking at the sky, which was beginning to glow orange with the sunset. Tessa, seizing the moment, asked, "Why have you distanced yourself so much from people?" It was on a sunny afternoon, during a community event, that Edouard and Tessa began to truly connect. Tessa was organizing a big dance rehearsal at the local court, preparing the kids for an important performance. The sound of hip-hop echoed, laughter and chatter filled the air, and the positive energy was palpable. Edouard, observing everything from a distance, couldn't help but feel curious. He saw how the kids admired her, how her smile seemed to light up the entire environment. In the middle of the rehearsal, Tessa noticed Edouard standing near the entrance. With a spark of mischief in her eyes, she walked over to him. "Are you just going to stand there watching, or do you want to help?" she asked, crossing her arms and flashing that cheeky smile that was already starting to disarm him. Edouard hesitated. "I don't know anything about this," he replied, gesturing toward the kids dancing. Tessa smiled even wider. "Perfect, then it's a great time to learn. And who knows, you might discover you're useful for something beyond wearing expensive suits." Her teasing was light, but enough to spark in him the desire to participate, if only to prove her wrong. With some reluctance, Edouard agreed. He started by helping with simple tasks, like setting up chairs and organizing snacks. As he worked, he couldn't help but notice how the kids looked at Tessa, how she knew each name, each story, and how every word of encouragement from her seemed to lift everyone's spirits. Later, when the rehearsal ended, Tessa sat next to Edouard on the bench by the court. Both were tired, but her smile was as radiant as it had been at the start of the day. "You did well, Edouard. Who would have thought the man from the glass towers could handle chairs and snacks?" He chuckled softly, something rare for him, but which seemed to come naturally around her. "It wasn't as terrible as I imagined," he admitted, looking at the sky, which was beginning to glow orange with the sunset. Tessa, seizing the moment, asked, "Why have you distanced yourself so much from people?" Edouard remained silent for a moment, but something in her gaze encouraged him to open up. "I've lost so much," he began, his voice low. "My wife, Alessia, was the love of my life. After she was gone, I threw myself into work, trying to fill the void. But everything crumbled when someone I trusted betrayed me. I lost my fortune, my home, everything. Since then, I've become what you see today, a man who prefers isolation." Tessa listened intently, without interrupting, her eyes filled with understanding. When he finished, she gently touched his hand. "I'm so sorry, Edouard. Losing someone we love is a pain that never fully goes away." She paused before continuing. "I've lost someone too. My older brother. He got involved with the wrong people and became a victim of the violence here. That's why I do what I do, to try to prevent other kids from going down the same path." The conversation flowed naturally, each sharing more of themselves. For the first time, Edouard felt understood without judgment. And Tessa began to see something new in Edouard. Beneath the arrogance and cold demeanor was a wounded man who still had a heart. That day, something shifted between them. Edouard started to see Tessa's world through different eyes. And Tessa, in turn, began to see in Edouard someone deeper and more vulnerable than she had ever imagined. It was the beginning of a connection neither of them could have predicted. Edouard, who once avoided any kind of connection, now found himself being drawn closer, not just to Tessa but to the spirit of the community around him. He began to admire her strength, her ability to smile in the face of adversity. And without realizing it, Edouard started to change. He smiled more, opened up more. And Tessa? She began to notice that she felt something for the man who had once seemed so cold and arrogant. Then came the night of the classical music. Under the starlit sky, Tessa proposed something that took Edouard by surprise. "Dance with me," she asked, her voice a mix of challenge and sweetness, enough to melt any hesitation he still had. "I'm not much of a dancer," he tried to argue, but Tessa wasn't having it. "It's not about knowing how to dance, Edouard. It's about feeling the moment." Reluctantly, he agreed, and for the first time in years, allowed himself to be vulnerable. Tessa guided his hands gently, one on her waist, the other in her hand. As the soft music echoed through the yard, illuminated only by the stars, they moved slowly. At first, Edouard was tense, but Tessa's lightness seemed to guide him naturally. Their eyes met, and something deeper began to unfold. The connection that had been building in small gestures and playful banter finally took shape. Edouard, who always kept himself in control, found himself captivated by Tessa's radiant gaze. He couldn't resist any longer. With his heart racing, he leaned closer and kissed her. It was a hesitant kiss, almost timid, as if he were afraid of crossing a line. When he realized what he had done, he pulled back abruptly. "I'm sorry, Tessa. I shouldn't have," he began, confused and unsure. Tessa, however, gently touched his face, stopping him. "You don't need to apologize, Edouard. I feel it too. In fact, I've been feeling this since I started to know the real you, since I saw beyond your coldness. You're not the man you try to appear to be. You're so much more." Edouard was surprised, but he couldn't look away from her. "I feel the same," he began, his voice almost a whisper. "Since you came into my life, everything has changed. You've shown me a world I didn't know I needed. You've brought back something I thought I'd lost forever." Before he could finish, Tessa leaned in and kissed him again. This time, it was a kiss full of intensity, as if both had finally allowed their feelings to break free. Time seemed to stand still, and in that moment, all the barriers they had built between them disappeared. When they pulled away, still in each other's arms, Edouard whispered, "I think I'm in love with you." Tessa smiled, her eyes sparkling with emotion. "Then we're in the same boat because I'm in love with you too, Edouard." They laughed together, a light-hearted laughter full of relief and happiness. And there, under the stars, they allowed themselves to embrace the love that had finally blossomed between them. When Edouard regained his fortune, it was as though a door to his old world had suddenly reopened. He received the news over the phone, with his lawyer confirming that the scheme that had taken everything from him had been uncovered. Edouard was entitled to reclaim his wealth and properties. At that moment, he felt a mix of relief and euphoria. It was as if a piece of him, ripped away, was finally returning. However, as he began to reorganize his former life, something felt out of place. Even surrounded once again by luxury and comfort, he found himself staring at his phone, thinking of Tessa and that small, simple world full of life that he had come to love. Her absence was palpable, like a shadow that lingered in his now lavish routine. He tried to move on, but his first dinner alone in the mansion was a stark reminder of his solitude. The echo of his footsteps in the vast halls and the coldness of the pristine rooms unsettled him. Edouard realized that in the days he spent with Tessa, laughter had returned to his life, even in the simplest moments. Now, that laughter was gone. Memories of her, the neighborhood, and the community haunted him in an unexpected way. No matter how hard he tried to fit back into his luxurious routine, something didn't click. He visited Tessa a few times, but the visits were brief and formal, as if they both avoided acknowledging the growing distance between them. One night, as he arrived home, Edouard found himself staring at the empty courtyard of his mansion. He remembered the stars, the dance they had shared, and how she had made him feel alive in a way he didn't know was possible. It was in that crushing silence that the truth hit him. What he truly wanted wasn't a return to his life of luxury. It was the warmth, the spontaneity, and the passion he had found with Tessa. That's when he made a decision. Edouard picked up the phone, his heart racing, and called her. "Tessa, can you have dinner with me tomorrow?" I want to show you something. Her voice, hesitant but warm, replied, Sure, Edouard. I'll be there. The next evening, he welcomed her to the mansion. Tessa looked stunning, but she still had that authentic charm he admired so much. During dinner, they talked about everything: the kids, the impact she continued to make in the community, and how his life had changed since meeting her. Then Edouard stood, walked to the center of the room, and turned on a classical song. He extended his hand to her and asked, May I have this dance? Tessa smiled, took his hand, and stood. As they danced, their eyes met, and Edouard finally let out the words he had been holding in for days. Tessa, I thought I was returning to my world, but I've realized my world is you. Without you, none of this means anything. She was silent for a moment, her eyes brimming with tears. I've missed you too, Edouard. More than I thought I would. You've changed my life in so many ways. Before she could finish, he kissed her. This time, there was no hesitation. It was a kiss full of emotion, as if they had finally found each other completely. That night, Edouard realized he no longer wanted to live without her. The vibrant energy she brought into his life was irreplaceable. And Tessa, in turn, understood that Edouard wasn't just the cold, arrogant man she had first met. He was someone like her, who was ready to start over and build something new. Together, they decided that true luxury was living alongside someone you love, in a place where both could find happiness. Not long after, they got married in a simple yet meaningful ceremony, surrounded by friends from the community. Edouard began investing in local projects, while Tessa continued her dance classes. The mansion became a symbol of the past, while their present was filled with vibrancy and love, where simplicity and togetherness were the true foundations of their happiness. Their intimate wedding united not only their lives but also their purposes. Edouard focused on transforming the community through impactful initiatives, while Tessa carried on inspiring young people through her hip-hop lessons. Together, they didn't just change their own lives, they touched and improved the lives of many around them. The mansion remained a relic of Edouard's past, but his real home was with Tessa. They proved that love could heal, transform, and give life new meaning. And so, between dances and projects, they built a story where love and compassion were the cornerstones of a happy and authentic future. Did this touching story move you? Let me know in the comments what resonated with you the most, and don't forget to share it with your friends who love inspiring stories too. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss a thing. Your support is what makes all of this possible. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.